I knew the HOA had completely lost their minds the second I drove back from town and saw strangers tearing apart my chicken coop with power tools, while a giant wooden sign beside my fence already read future site of the Green Valley community. Garden, and standing in the middle of my property directing people around like she owned the place was HOA President Linda, wearing gardening gloves and smiling proudly like she had just improved the neighborhood. For a few seconds I honestly thought, maybe I was looking at the wrong property because nobody in their right mind would walk onto private land, destroy somebody's coop, and start building a garden without permission. But then one of the workers actually waved at me and asked where I wanted the compost bins placed. That was the exact moment I realized this insanity was real. I jumped out of my truck and demanded everybody stop immediately, because the coop sitting behind my barn was not abandoned land. It was active private property. And those chickens had been part of my farm setup for years, but Linda walked over completely calm and told me the HOA board voted to repurpose the structure for sustainable community development since the area was supposedly underutilized. There were literally live chickens still inside the fenced area when they started removing panels from the coop. I could not even process the level of entitlement happening right in front of me. Before this gets even crazier, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Karen Stories Daily, because what happened after the HOA pushed this situation too far ended up turning the entire neighborhood upside down. Now, to understand why Linda believed she could get away with this, you need some background. Because from the day I moved into the neighborhood, she hated the fact that I maintained small-scale farming on my property, even though county regulations fully allowed it. She constantly complained about the chickens, the fencing, the feed deliveries, and honestly anything else connected to country living because, according to her, the neighborhood needed a more modern, community-focused image. At first, the HOA sent warning letters claiming the co-op reduced nearby property values, but every complaint failed because my property followed county code exactly, and after losing multiple disputes, Linda became obsessed with finding another way to pressure me into removing the co-op voluntarily. Then a few months earlier, the HOA started talking publicly about building a community garden space for residents, and almost immediately Linda became very interested in the back corner of my property where the coop sat, because it bordered the HOA walking trail area. I told her directly several times that my land was private and not available for any HOA projects, but apparently she decided my answer did not matter. Standing there that afternoon, I watched workers continue measuring space and unloading gardening equipment while my chickens ran around. Confused from all the noise, and somehow Linda still acted like she was doing the neighborhood a favor, I called county deputies immediately while recording everything because at that point this had already gone far beyond a simple property dispute. And honestly, the craziest part was how confident Linda looked while trespassing on active private land, destroying structures, and organizing volunteers like she had full legal authority to do it. Then she made the mistake that changed everything. While arguing with me, she casually mentioned that the HOA had every right to improve the area because technically the community already depended on infrastructure access crossing my property anyway. That sentence caught my attention immediately. Infrastructure access. So later that evening, after deputies forced everyone off my land and documented the damage, I started digging through old property records maps and utility agreements connected to my acreage because something about Linda's comment sounded way too specific to be random, and what I discovered completely changed the entire situation. Years before the neighborhood was even built, an old agricultural water line had been installed beneath part of my property, supplying irrigation and backup. Water access to land later developed into the HOA community, and according to the original easement documents, the maintenance rights attached to that line were conditional, not permanent, meaning the HOA only retained access rights as long as surrounding agricultural structures connected to the original land use remained protected and operational, including my chicken coop area, the exact structure Linda just helped destroy. The second my attorney reviewed the documents, he actually laughed because he realized what the HOA had accidentally done by interfering with protected agricultural use on my property by tearing apart the coop and violating the land agreement themselves. They potentially triggered termination clauses connected to the Shared water easement running beneath my land, and suddenly, the same HOA that thought they seized my Coop for a cute neighborhood garden was facing the possibility of losing legal access protections tied to a major community water line. At first, I honestly could not believe it myself, but once surveyors confirmed the records, everything became very real, very fast. Because without that protected easement, the HOA would need expensive emergency negotiations, utility redesigns, and possible county intervention just to maintain guaranteed long-term water access protections, and Linda still had absolutely no idea the legal disaster she had just created for the entire neighborhood by touching my Coop in the first place. The moment the HOA attorney received copies of the easement documents, panic spread through the board almost immediately because suddenly this was no longer about chickens or a garden project anymore. Now the entire neighborhood was facing a possible legal crisis connected to water access rights. Surveyors, engineers, and county officials started reviewing the original agreements, and the more they looked, the worse things became for the HOA because the records clearly showed the agricultural protections attached to my property were part of the conditions allowing the waterline easement to exist in the first place. In simple words, the HOA damaged the very land protections connected to their own infrastructure. Access. Linda tried claiming the destruction was accidental, but that argument collapsed once videos surfaced showing organized workers dismantling the co-op under direct HOA instructions, while community garden materials were already being unloaded onto my land. Residents became furious after learning their HOA leadership created a massive legal problem over a chicken coop dispute. And suddenly the same neighbors who once ignored the situation started demanding answers from the board. The HOA eventually halted the garden project, completely paid for rebuilding the Coop repaired property damage, and entered emergency legal negotiations to secure updated water access agreements before the county became involved further. As for Linda, she quietly resigned from the HOA not long after because, honestly, there was no recovering from the embarrassment of nearly putting the neighborhood water system at risk over personal obsession and control issues. Now every time I walk past that rebuilt Coop and hear the chickens making noise out there, I still think about how quickly arrogance falls apart once people finally run into consequences they never expected. If you made it this far, let me know what you would have done in this situation and share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and do not forget to subscribe to Karen's Stories Daily for more crazy HOA stories where entitlement always ends badly.